Lydia Marlowe stood behind the counter of her small flower shop in St. Ives, carefully arranging a bouquet of wildflowers. The salty breeze from the Cornish coast drifted through the open door, mingling with the scent of freshly cut blooms. Her 7-year-old daughter Poppy watched her intently, clutching a handful of bright poppies she had picked that morning. "It must be perfect, Mummy," Poppy said quietly, her eyes shining with determination. "For Nanny and for you too." Lydia smiled, touched by the child's thoughtfulness. 4 years, the wounds left by her mother Agnes's absence had festered in silence. Agnes now lived in a care home in Penzance, a place Lydia rarely visited. Dementia had stolen much from her mother, including her memories of their family. Poppy, however, was unaware of the painful history. To her, Nanny was a mysterious figure she longed to meet. The gift she was preparing was more than flowers. It was a bridge to a family that had drifted apart. That afternoon, Lydia and Poppy set off for Penzance, the bouquet wrapped carefully in brown paper. As they drove through the rolling hills and along the rugged coastline, Lydia's mind was heavy with memories she had tried to forget. What would her mother be like now? Would the flowers awaken anything inside her? At the care home, the air was thick with antiseptic and fading echoes of past lives. Lydia hesitated at the door, heart pounding. Poppy tugged her hand gently. "Come on, Mummy. Nanny is waiting." Inside the small room, Agnes sat by the window, gazing out at the distant sea. Her eyes were clouded but curious. When Lydia introduced herself, a flicker of recognition flashed and vanished. The fragile threads of memory seemed just out of reach. Poppy stepped forward and held out the bouquet. "Nanny, Mummy says you like poppies," she whispered. For a moment, Agnes reached out, touching the flowers as if they held a secret. Then, her lips quivered and a faint smile broke through the fog. Lydia felt a crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. But beneath that fragile moment lay shadows she did not yet understand. The days after their visit to Penzance lingered heavily in Lydia's mind. She tried to focus on her flower shop, but the memories of Agnes's vacant eyes and the faint smile haunted her. Poppy, however, seemed unaffected, happily tending to her small garden outside their cottage in St. Ives, unaware of the tension simmering beneath. One evening, as twilight settled over the Cornish coast, Lydia found an old box tucked away in her mother's belongings, kept in the attic of her childhood home before it was sold. Dust covered the faded photographs and yellowed letters inside. Among them, a folded note caught her eye. The handwriting was unfamiliar, hurried, and urgent. It spoke of a secret meeting, a promise broken, and a pain Lydia had never heard of. The words pulled her deeper into a story she thought she had left behind. Who had sent this letter? Why had Agnes hidden it? That night, Lydia lay awake, the sea breeze whispering through the cracked window. Poppy stirred beside her, clutching a small pressed flower from their bouquet. "Mummy," Poppy whispered, "do you think Nanny remembers us now?" Lydia swallowed the lump in her throat and kissed her daughter's forehead. "I hope so, darling. I hope so." The next morning, Lydia decided to return to Penzance, determined to uncover the truth. The care home felt colder this time, less welcoming. Agnes's condition seemed to worsen. Yet, in rare moments, she spoke fragments of a name. Someone Lydia had never met but who was part of the family's shadowed past. The gift of flowers had opened a door. Behind it, secrets waited, and Lydia knew she had to find them before it was too late. Lydia returned to St. Ives with a mysterious letter weighing heavily in her bag. The words she had read echoed in her mind. A secret meeting long ago, a promise made and broken. She wondered what part Agnes had played in it all, and why the past had been buried so deep. Determined to find answers, Lydia reached out to an old family friend, Mr. Howard, who had known her mother in her youth. The next day, she found herself at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, where Mr. Howard waited with a knowing look. He spoke carefully, revealing fragments of a story Lydia had never heard. Agnes had once been engaged to a man named Thomas, a figure who vanished from the family records as if erased. Their relationship had ended abruptly, surrounded by whispered scandal and regret. "It was a time no one wanted to remember," Mr. Howard said quietly. "A promise made in hope, but shattered by betrayal." Lydia's heart ached as pieces began to fall into place. Could Thomas still be out there? Was he connected to the woman in the care home whose memories were slipping away? Meanwhile, Poppy continued to prepare small bouquets, insisting they were messages of love. One evening, she looked up at her mother with innocent eyes. Mummy, maybe Nanny forgot because she's waiting for the right flower. Lydia smiled sadly, unsure whether it was hope or denial that kept her going. But deep down, she knew the journey had only just begun. The letter had opened a door to the past, but Lydia sensed that some answers still danced just out of reach. Days turned into weeks as she juggled running her flower shop and chasing shadows of memories. Poppy's innocent hope became a quiet comfort amid the storm. One afternoon, a stranger appeared at the shop. A tall man with sharp eyes and a hesitant smile introduced himself as Thomas Hale. Lydia's breath caught. Could it really be him? The name from the letter, the man who had vanished from her mother's life? Thomas spoke cautiously, explaining that he had left Cornwall years ago to escape a painful chapter. He had tried to reach Agnes, but the silence had been deafening. Now, hearing about Agnes's condition, he hoped for a chance to make amends. Lydia's heart pounded. Could this man be the key to healing wounds long left open? Or was he another mystery meant to deepen the divide? That evening, Lydia took Poppy to the cliffs overlooking the sea. The wind tangled their hair, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. "Mummy," Poppy said softly, "maybe Nanny's waiting for a story. Like the ones you tell me." Lydia looked out at the horizon, the setting sun casting golden hues over the water. "Maybe, darling. Maybe." The past whispered through the wind, but the future still held its secrets. The days grew longer as spring unfolded across Cornwall. Daffodils swayed gently by the roadside, and the hedgerows glowed with tiny blossoms. In the heart of St. Ives, Lydia's flower shop brimmed with color, yet inside her, questions still bloomed with no answers. She could not stop thinking about Thomas Hale. His eyes, his voice, the sorrow behind every word he said. Had her mother really loved him? And if so, why had everything gone so wrong? One morning, Lydia found herself standing once more outside the care home in Penzance. She clutched a fresh bouquet of poppies, cornflowers and white daisies. Poppy's suggestion. The little girl skipped beside her, holding a hand-painted card that read, "To Nanny, with love from Poppy." Inside, Agnes sat by the window, staring into the garden. Her eyes were vacant, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When Lydia approached, the old woman turned her head slightly, but showed no recognition. Lydia knelt beside her and placed the flowers on the small table. "Hello, Mum," she said gently. "We brought you something." Agnes blinked slowly. "Isn't it too early for poppies?" she muttered. Lydia's breath caught. The sentence was small, meaningless perhaps, but it was the first sign of life in weeks. She exchanged a glance with Poppy, who stepped forward and held out the card. "I painted it myself," Poppy said. "Mummy said you like red poppies the best." Agnes's hand trembled as she reached out and touched the card. Her eyes shimmered, and for a moment, her gaze seemed to fix on Lydia. "Rose used to pick them, by the railway tracks," she whispered. Lydia felt her chest tighten. Rose. Her older sister. The sister she had barely known, who had died young. Another shadow from their broken family past. Agnes had never spoken of Rose in years. The name had become a ghost. She sat down beside her mother, unable to stop the wave of emotion. "You remember her?" "Not everything," Agnes murmured. "But the flowers, they help. They bring light." Lydia nodded slowly. "Then we'll bring more." That night, back in St. Ives, Lydia could not sleep. Her mind raced with half-formed memories and questions. She thought about the garden outside the care home. It was small, unkempt, and gray. If flowers brought clarity, perhaps she could do something more. The next morning, she called Thomas. "Can we meet?" she asked. "I have an idea." They met at the garden behind the care home, where Agnes sat with a blanket over her knees. Lydia stood beside Thomas, watching Agnes gaze into the distance. "I want to build a memory garden," she said. "For her. A place filled with scents, colors, and textures she might recognize." Thomas nodded. "A garden of the past." "Yes." With every flower that meant something to her. From her youth, her marriage, the days she had children. "Maybe it will bring more of her back." Thomas's eyes softened. "I remember the way she used to talk about lavender fields. And the snapdragons at the church gate." They spent hours planning it, gathering plants, researching flowers from Agnes's past. Poppy insisted on adding sunflowers, claiming they made her nanny smile. Volunteers from the care home offered to help, and soon the dull patch of grass became a place of soft soil, new shoots, and delicate petals. Weeks passed. Agnes began to respond more often, sometimes with words, other times with small gestures. She recognized a lily and spoke of her wedding. She touched a rose and whispered, "For baby Lydia." On one such visit, Lydia found Agnes humming a tune from a lullaby. Tears filled her eyes as she knelt beside her. "Do you remember that song?" she asked. Agnes smiled faintly. "I used to sing it to you when you were very small." It was a moment Lydia would never forget. A fragment of love, dug up from beneath years of silence. And in the heart of that blooming garden, Lydia felt something else begin to grow. A renewed connection not just with her mother, but with her own past. But just as things began to mend, news came from the care home that shook her world again. Agnes had wandered out during the early morning mist, barefoot and confused. They found her hours later by the beach, holding a single, crushed poppy. She had said just one thing to the carer before they brought her back. "Where is Rose?" "She's waiting for me." The morning after Agnes was found by the beach, Lydia sat in her car outside the care home, her fingers clenched around the steering wheel. A fog heavier than the Cornish mist seemed to press against her chest. What had driven her mother to wander so far? Why did she keep reaching back for a past that refused to stay buried? Inside, Agnes had been tucked safely into her bed, a nurse beside her. Her feet were bandaged, and she seemed unaware of the trouble she'd caused. But when Lydia stepped into the room, Agnes stirred. Her eyes fluttered open and fixed on Lydia, not with confusion, but with longing. "I saw her," she whispered. "Rose." She was standing by the water. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed and reached for her mother's hand. "Mum, Rose is gone. She died a long time ago." Agnes shook her head, eyes wide. "Not there, she didn't. Not like they said." The word struck like cold water. For years, Lydia had believed that Rose drowned in the quarry after sneaking out one night. It was the only story the family ever told. Agnes had wept for months back then, but never spoke of it again. "What do you mean, not like they said?" But Agnes's eyes had already begun to glaze again. She turned her head away and mumbled, "He lied. He always lied." Lydia left the care home dazed. She walked the long road back into town, her mind spinning. The name Thomas rose in her thoughts again, but it didn't feel right this time. Agnes hadn't said he in tenderness, but with fear. That evening, as the wind rattled the windows of her flat above the flower shop, Lydia opened the old box of letters once more. This time, she dug deeper. Beneath the familiar bundles of yellowed envelopes, she found something wedged at the bottom. A faded leather-bound album, its spine cracked and corners frayed. Inside were photographs she'd never seen. Snapshots from the early 70s. Her parents as a young couple. Lydia as a toddler. And then, in the middle of the book, a picture that made her breath hitch. It was Rose. Older than Lydia had ever remembered her. Perhaps 10 or 11. She stood with her back to the cliffs near Porthmeor, hand in hand with a tall man. The image was grainy, but Lydia knew that profile. Her stomach twisted. The man wasn't their father. She turned the photo over. On the back, in Rose's looping childish handwriting, were the words, "Me and Mr. B. At Porthmeor, June." Lydia's mind raced. Mr. B? She took the photo and returned to the care home the next day. Agnes sat under a wool blanket in the garden, her eyes fixed on the marigolds. Lydia knelt and showed her the photograph. "Who is he, Mum? Who's Mr. B?" Agnes trembled, her lips parting. Her eyes locked onto the image, and a sound escaped her throat. It was halfway between a sigh and a sob. "Benjamin," she said. "Ben Partridge. He lived up near the old coast road. A friend of your father's. But he started coming around more after Rose turned 9. Lydia's stomach churned. Was there something? Was he hurting her? Agnes flinched. "I didn't know. I didn't see it. She never told me." But then she stopped eating. Stopped sleeping. And one day she ran. "To the quarry?" Agnes shook her head. "That's what they said. That she fell. But I found her coat the next day, dry, hanging behind the door. And your father, he told me to leave it." "She's gone," he said. "Let it go." Lydia could hardly breathe. Are you saying she didn't die there? Agnes nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I think she ran away. I think he helped her. Ben Partridge. No. Thomas. Agnes looked up sharply. He loved her in his own quiet way. I think he knew something. But your father made him disappear too. Fired him. Threatened him. The garden spun around Lydia. Everything she thought she knew was breaking apart. Rose hadn't drowned. Thomas hadn't just been a ghost of a romance. He might have been a protector. Her father, the man who'd raised her in silence and distance, might have hidden something far more terrible. That night, Lydia went to the archives at the town library. She requested the local newspapers from 1977 and combed through every page. There was the report of Rose's supposed death, a small article, barely a column long. No autopsy. No funeral. Just a statement from her father. Our beloved daughter Rose passed away in a tragic accident. We request privacy. There was no record of a body ever being found. But then she found something else. A missing persons report, filed months later under a different name. Rosa P. Hartley, aged 12. Last seen near the Cornwall coast. Her hands shook. Rose had changed her name. She'd tried to vanish. And then, Lydia noticed the signature on the bottom of the form. Thomas Hale. The wind howled louder than usual the next morning, rattling the windows of Lydia's flat as though urging her to move. She packed the photograph, the letters, and a notebook of scrawled questions into her satchel and headed to the one place she hoped would give her answers, the cliffs above Porthmeor. She had a vague memory of an old cottage once owned by the Partridge family. Whispers from her childhood that Mr. Ben lived in the lonely house by the sea. After an hour's walk along the coastal path, boots crunching over loose gravel and wind whipping through her coat, she found it. The house stood crooked and stubborn against the hillside, weather-beaten but not abandoned. Ivy had clawed its way up one wall, and the wooden gate hung lopsided, creaking softly as she pushed it open. She hesitated only a moment before knocking. Nothing. She knocked again, louder this time. Just as she turned to leave, the door opened a crack. An old man peered out, gray-stubbled and wary. His eyes were the first thing Lydia noticed. Startled, sharp, and haunted. Yes. Mr. Partridge? She asked, her voice trembling. Benjamin Partridge? His brow furrowed. Depends who's asking. I'm Lydia Bell. I believe you knew my sister, Rose. The door didn't open further, but it didn't close either. He studied her face for a long time, and something in his posture shifted. A lowering of the shoulders. A release. You'd better come in. The house inside smelled of wood smoke and salt. It was cramped but clean. The sitting room had shelves overflowing with books and the fireplace still warm. Benjamin moved slowly, favoring one leg, and motioned for Lydia to sit. You've her eyes, he said softly. And her nose. Lydia pulled the photograph from her satchel and handed it to him. Do you remember this? He nodded without even glancing at the back. Porthmeor. She liked the wind there. She wrote Mr. B. That was you. He nodded again. Did you know what was happening to her? He stared into the flames for a long while. I suspected. But your father, he was the sort who didn't like questions. Made it clear Rose wasn't my concern. But she came to me one night, terrified. Said she couldn't stay. Said if she did, something worse would happen. Lydia's heart pounded. So you helped her? Benjamin finally looked at her, the firelight catching the glint of pain in his eyes. I didn't know what else to do. I knew someone, a couple up north, kind people, childless. They agreed to take her in, change her name, start fresh. I thought it was the only way to keep her safe. But everyone thought she drowned, Lydia whispered. That was the plan. Your father told the police a story. No body, but no one questioned it too hard. Especially not with his name and money. And I disappeared after that. Went up to Devon for a few years. When I came back I stayed silent. Lydia felt tears sting her eyes. Did she ever try to find us? Benjamin shook his head slowly. She wrote to me once. Said she was happy. Said not to look for her. Said some things were better left behind. Lydia gripped the arms of the chair. I need to find her. I need to know. Benjamin hesitated. Then he stood and limped to a drawer in the corner. He pulled out an old envelope and placed it in Lydia's hands. That's the last letter she sent. There's a return address. But it's from years ago. I don't know if it's still good. Lydia clutched the letter like a lifeline. As she turned to leave, Benjamin called out, "You look like her, you know. But you're stronger. You came looking." She never could. The clouds had gathered heavy and low as Lydia stepped back into the wind. The address on the envelope read, Winterslow, Wiltshire. She barely waited until she got back to St. Ives before booking the train. Tomorrow, she would travel east. If there was even the smallest chance Rose was still there, or someone who knew her, she had to take it. But as she returned to the care home to say goodbye to Agnes, she found her mother in a new kind of daze. Agnes was sitting by the window, clutching something tightly in her hands. "Mom?" Lydia asked gently. Agnes turned slowly and opened her hand. It was a necklace. A simple locket. Lydia recognized it. Rose's. She hadn't seen it in years. "She left this for me," Agnes said. "The night she went. Slipped it under my pillow. I found it the next day, but I didn't show anyone." "Why not?" "Because it meant she'd made the choice herself," Agnes whispered. "She wasn't taken. She left." Lydia sat beside her, the weight of the locket warm between their hands. The train rattled through the green fields of Wiltshire as Lydia stared out at the passing landscape. Winterslow was a small village, quiet and forgotten by time. She clutched the letter from Rose tightly, hoping for a sign, a clue, anything. The village felt like a place frozen in memory, where the modern world barely intruded. Stone cottages with thatched roofs lined the narrow lanes, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and earth. Lydia's heart pounded as she followed the address, a small weathered house on the edge of town. The door creaked open before she could knock. A woman, older but with the same striking eyes as Rose, smiled gently. "You must be Lydia," she said. "I'm Margaret. I knew your sister." Inside, the walls were lined with photographs and mementos. Margaret explained that Rose had come here years ago, trying to disappear from her past. She had worked in a nearby flower shop and spent long hours painting wildflowers by the river. She was frightened, Margaret said softly. But she loved Daisy very much. She talked about you both, always. Then Margaret reached into a drawer and pulled out a box. Inside was a bundle of letters and a small wooden box. "Rose wanted you to have these when the time was right." Lydia opened the wooden box carefully. Inside was a delicate silver locket, identical to the one Agnes had held. A note was tucked inside, written in Rose's neat handwriting. "To my beloved family. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. I am sorry for the pain my leaving caused, but I hope these memories will bring you peace. The locket is a symbol of the bond we share, unbroken by time or distance. Please take care of Daisy. She is your greatest gift." Tears blurred Lydia's vision as she held the locket close. That night, standing on the cliffs overlooking the sea, Lydia felt a calm she had not known for years. The past was painful, but it was not the end. The love Rose had left behind was still alive. In Daisy, in Agnes, and now in Lydia's heart. The locket caught the last rays of sunlight as the waves crashed below, a final gift bridging the years and healing the fractures of a family torn apart.